What's up, Vetters? Patrick here with Vetted. Today we're talking about this.
There was another individual that Dave Grush used to work with. His call sign was Quake, and he was going to go public and talk to Congress. And unfortunately, he was in Washington, D.C. at a hotel, and they found him dead as well.
People should look into Matthew Sullivan. He was scheduled to testify in front of Congress, and Rep. Burlison came out and talked about this. It was deemed credible and urgent because of the suspicious. And I think people need to look into that. The FBI is involved, has been involved for quite some time.
My office found out about it last year. We sent a letter to the FBI about a gentleman named Matthew Sullivan, who actually we had reached out to. He was scheduled to come in for an interview. Within 2 weeks, he had suspiciously committed.
Congressman Burlison, who's been leading the charge on Capitol Hill about this, said Matthew Sullivan, one of the people who has turned up, his death believed to be a. He said, we were in talks with getting him in front of us to talk about some UAPs. He was going to be potentially a whistleblower, some of the language he's used talking about him. And then all of a sudden he was gone and we couldn't talk to him anymore. So he says, I've got questions about that death and how that's been reported too, along with all of these other people. And he's calling on the FBI and other agencies to get involved.
39-year-old Matthew James Sullivan, a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer who died in 2024. Republican Congressman Eric Burlison wrote about Sullivan in a letter saying Sullivan was about to testify in a whistleblower case about UFOs.
All right, Vetters, please hit that like button. That really helps out the videos. And of course, if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button, y'all. All right, Vetters, so what's today's video about? Well, today's video is about this guy right here. His name is Matthew Sullivan. And you just heard in the intro, a lot of different people talking about him. And the most interesting thing is that he was one of David Grush's 40 witnesses who was allegedly going to come forward with UFO information. Apparently, he was part of the UFO legacy program. That's how it's being described. And he was a whistleblower. And 2 weeks before he was set to speak to Congress, he passed away mysteriously, right? So let's get into it. I was scrolling through my bank app recently, and I realized I was still getting charged for a gym membership that I haven't stepped foot in months because, I live in Spain now. And somehow I was still paying for a streaming service twice. Let's just say I felt like an idiot. All that money was just quietly disappearing every month, and I had no idea. And that's when I fired up Rocket Money. It tracks every subscription across all my accounts and lets me cancel the ones I don't want with just a few taps. They've already helped users cancel over 880 million in unwanted subscriptions. It also pulls all my checkings, savings, loans, and investments into one clean dashboard so I can finally see the full picture and actually stay on top of my spending. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spendings, and helps lower your bills so you can expand your savings. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/vetted. That's rocketmoney.com/vetted. rocketmoney.com/vetted. Now, before Matthew Sullivan's name was mentioned, Eric Burlison had brought up a gentleman, but kept him nameless, right? And this is what Eric Burlison said before about Matthew Sullivan, before he was named.
When I first came in, I heard of another gentleman, and I'll keep that name to
Sure.
out of respect. I sent a letter to the FBI investigating the suspicious suicide of another individual who had worked alongside, other whistleblowers like David Grush and Jake Barber who had come forward. So their colleague is mysteriously committed suicide. We've already sent the letter to the FBI to investigate that, and that is an ongoing investigation.
And shout out to UAP James on X for finding that clip. Now, obviously, now Matthew Sullivan gets named, right? And people have been digging in and finding out all kinds of different stuff, which I found to be quite interesting. And, it's scary. Yeah, I have to admit, this is kind of a scary one, right? This is someone who allegedly had direct connections to the UFO legacy program, wants to speak to Congress, and mysteriously dies, before that can happen. And within a time frame where you would find it more than a coincidence, right? Is it a coincidence? I mean, that's still a possibility for sure, but we're here to talk about interesting, conspiratorial, skeptical things, right, on this channel. So let's indulge this theory for a little bit and assume that something did happen to Matthew Sullivan.
Congressman Eric Burlison, who is calling for the FBI to get involved. Congressman, when did you first find out about this?
My office found out about it last year. We sent a letter to the FBI about a gentleman named Matthew Sullivan, who actually we had reached out to. He was scheduled to come in for an interview. Within 2 weeks, he had suspiciously committed suicide. That report was referred to the Office of Inspector General. They deemed it credible and urgent. They then referred it to the FBI. So this is not the first that we've heard of this. That was the first that we became aware of.
And, they're calling on the FBI to look into this and figure out what's going on. I mean, I don't know how well the FBI is doing right now, to be honest with you, for them to handle this case. But we'll have to wait and see if there is anything mysterious with his passing. If they can find something mysterious with his passing, that opens some doors, right? In the sense that, okay, maybe something of why he was connected to coming to testify about UFOs, something happened. Because clearly, if they were trying to silence all of, let's say, David Grush's 40 firsthand whistleblowers, then wouldn't more people be gone?
Congressman Burlison, who's been leading the charge on Capitol Hill about this, said Matthew Sullivan, one of the people who has turned up, his death believed to be a suicide. He said, we were in talks with getting him in front of us to talk about some UAPs. He was going to be potentially a whistleblower, some of the language he's used talking about him. And then all of a sudden he was gone and we couldn't talk to him anymore. So he says, I've got questions about that death and how that's been reported too, along with all of these other people. And he's calling on the FBI and other agencies to get involved.
And who are these 40, witnesses you keep talking about, Patrick? Okay, essentially back in July of 2023, David Grush testified before Congress, and he brought up that he had 40 witnesses or so, some people believe a few more, who had basically helped him, right? Firsthand witnesses who had basically helped him put together his years-long investigation, and that's what he testified about, right?
Mr. Grush, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General, and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had the people with the firsthand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General.
Thank you. And
so everyone's been wondering, who are these 40 witnesses, right? And we found out who a couple people are. But the majority have been left nameless, right? Anonymous. Well, now we find out one more, Matthew Sullivan. And, again, it is quite peculiar, but wouldn't you also ask, what about the other ones? Are they also, something happened to them? Why are other people allowed to talk, but he's not?
Are you one of David Grush's 40 firsthand witnesses that he says he presented to the Intelligence Community Inspector General Thomas Monheim?
I don't know the 40. I know of some of them. One of them is the guy who's no longer with us, whose demise was quite conveniently timed for those who might have something to do with it. There are people that have died under very suspicious circumstances at the most convenient time for those who would want to have them silenced, who were coming out and who were speaking out on our activities.
Anybody you know?
Yes.
Can you say anything more?
No, because there's an investigation happening right now, and they're looking into it.
That's scary, man.
It is very scary.
All right, so you even have Jake Barber kind of admitting that he's also one of the 40 witnesses for David Grush and that he knew this guy. And at the time when this interview went out, this was, back when Skywatcher came out, which has been well over a year now. They don't name the guy, right? But so it's like people have been talking about Matthew Sullivan for a minute, but nobody knew his name. And now his name is out. right? That's essentially what's going on. But again, they're willing to silence people, but why him? Why not other people? And why is Jake allowed to talk about it? Does that make sense? Wouldn't you want to silence the people that are talking about this silencing? I don't know. Seems rather, that's also a coincidence and interesting, and also something to keep in mind. I'm not saying that Matthew Sullivan didn't die under mysterious circumstances, but I'm also saying, what are the reasons we're believing that? Is it just because UFOs and he passed away and he was supposed to testify? I agree. That's a coincidence. But is it just like a coincidence when you think of someone and they call you, right? And people go, oh, see, isn't that crazy? Isn't that a sign? Well, not really. What about all the times you think of people and they don't call you? Because that happens way more than when you think of someone and they do call you, right? So, and you only notice it because it happens. You may not notice all the other times because it doesn't happen, right? So, I don't know. I'm just asking questions.
39-year-old Matthew James Sullivan, a U.S. Air Force intelligence officer who died in 2024. Republican Congressman Eric Burlison wrote about Sullivan in a letter saying Sullivan was about to testify in a whistleblower case about UFOs.
But Eric Burlison is taking this very seriously, and I have no problem with him pushing it up the ladder to find out and have the FBI look into it, and let's figure out. Because if anything, his family deserves to know. You know, if there's anything crazy about it, right? If I'm part of Matthew Sullivan's family, I want something to be found out about that. But at the same time, I also wouldn't want my family member being dragged through conspiracy theories for no reason at all, right? Because then you just have a bunch of strangers like myself saying his name and saying what he might be involved with and what could have happened. You know, we also have to be sensitive there. Now, even Jeremy Corbell got into the mix of it.
People should look into Matthew Sullivan. He was scheduled to testify in front of Congress, and Rep. Burlison came out and talked about this. It was deemed credible and urgent because of the suspicious suicide. And I think people need to look into that. The FBI is involved, has been involved for quite some time.
So sounds like even Jeremy Corbell saying that the FBI is looking into how long is that going to take, right? What's going to happen there? A lot of things get started or mentioned they're going to happen, and then nothing ever happens, right? And look, the whole reason a lot of people are bringing this stuff up is because of all the scientists that are missing, and some aren't even scientists. I mean, there's a lot there, to be honest with you. I made a video about it. Nobody really watched it, but, you know, I put a lot of effort into that video. And, you know, it's one of those things where, I don't know, is there a connection with all this? Is it just a coincidence? Is it because we're noticing, so now we're starting to see it all? Right? Doesn't necessarily mean it's happening for mischievous reasons, but there's also nothing wrong with considering that and maybe putting it to rest, looking into it, figuring out, okay, there's nothing here, and moving on. You know, dismissing it as a whole also doesn't seem like a good strategy either. And they just talked about these Chinese scientists that are going missing too. Like, wait, what's going on? Again, should we be worried? I don't know. Now, there's another person also that apparently died under mysterious circumstances. And it's kind of an older story, but it's being brought up because of Matthew Sullivan. And Lou Elizondo talked about it on News Nation.
There is an individual that somebody you know, Chris Mellon, who's been on your show before, was going to talk to about 2.5, 3 years ago. He was a few days away from meeting this individual. He was an engineer, apparently on the legacy U.S. government's legacy UAP effort, and mysteriously died right before the meeting. There's another individual whom I spoke with. He reached out to me. I'm going to protect his identity here for the sake of his family, but he did meet an untimely end. He was a senior special agent at the Department of Energy, and he worked specifically in the Inspector General's shop, the IG shop. He was the most senior special agent for the Department of Energy, and he was talking to me about coming out and talking to Congress about what he knows within DOE and the files, the UAP files that they're holding on to. He was very upset, and he felt like he was a whistleblower. So I was arranging for this individual to actually meet with certain members of Congress. His wife, who is a doctor for the Veterans Affairs, walks in one evening after work and finds him dead on the sofa. Now, this was during COVID, but from my understanding, there was never any positive, if you will, connection between COVID and his death. He was relatively young. He wasn't an old guy. He wasn't particularly sick. He was healthy. He was athletic. So there are more individuals And certainly I think the FBI should do exactly what they said they're going to do. You have folks like Anna Polina Luna that are working very hard behind the scenes, also trying to, you just had her on your show, that's trying to get some additional clarity into this. There was another individual that Dave Bruce used to work with. His call sign was Quake, and he was going to go public and talk to Congress. And unfortunately, he was in Washington, D.C. at a hotel, and they found him dead as well.
So he brings up Matthew Sullivan there at the end, but he, codenamed Quake or whatever, I don't know what's going on with his Total Recall. I don't know. His name was Quaid. Anyway, whatever. Code names, Cloak and Dagger. I don't know. But regardless, here's a clip. Shout out to Astral on Twitter for finding this clip of Chris Mellon talking about this other guy, okay, who's I don't believe is Matthew Sullivan. The way Lou Elizondo splits it up, I think it's a different person. But still, also, very interesting.
One of the stories is, one of the allegations is, and I was supposed to meet a fellow, for example, who supposedly was in one of these aerospace companies and supposedly had been directly involved in that activity. And we were about 2 weeks away from meeting when he died, when he had a heart attack. And, can't say, whether that was true or not, but that's one of the allegations. And it makes sense because if you're the government and say you recovered some debris and there were complex components and materials, right? You wanted to keep it secret, but have world-class technicians and scientists try to understand it. It would be natural that you would go to Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or Grumman or some of those companies.
Now, many people were asking, why is this just being brought up now? Why are people not focused on it? Well, I remember this when this came out and we were talking about it. It just, again, this is kind of what happens. It comes up, it bubbles up, and then it bubbles down. It bubbles up, and then it bubbles down. And then things just move on. And then when something else comes up in the UFO community, people go back through and go and try to find all the connections. And that's all this is. That's basically what, UFO research is finding all the commonality. Oh, he said green UFO. This other guy said green UFO. This guy said green UFO. See, it's all connected. And that's essentially all we have to do, right? We're playing pin the tail on the donkey in the dark, right? We're in the dark. We have no idea. And to just sort of keep up with UFO news, this is what people do. They just find connections to make videos and make content, just like myself, to be honest with you. So you have to ask yourself at the same time, is there actually something here, or is this just filler news, right? To sort of fill the news because there's nothing going on, right? Because people want daily news drops about UFO disclosure, like any day it's coming, right? So I think there's enough here to say it's definitely worth looking into. Right. And figuring out what's going on, especially with Matthew Sullivan. And is there more to the scientist? I don't know. That's a tough one. But again, I don't see anything wrong with looking into it as long as it's not keeping other things from happening that are more beneficial. At this point, I don't really see that's the case. So let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Oh, real quick, shout out to Area 52 for sending me some merch. Check this out. I got a brand new shirt, Invisible College, hats you can get. I got a hoodie. I got a bunch of cool stuff that Chris Ramsey sent me from Area 52. So I'm going to put a link down below to his merch shop. Go get it. High quality stuff, y'all. I absolutely recommend the merch. I really mean that. In fact, he inspired me here at Vetted to get my new merch going that's way more high quality. So I'm excited for that. But anyway, shout out to Chris Ramsey, Area 52. Go get your merch now. We'll see you guys on the next one. Remember, Vettas, every day's a gift, y'all.